We have quorum. Bentley is recording. Let's dive into it. I have a program. Stephen, where are you at? Nope.
I'm muted, but I'm here.
Yeah. Do you have a program or should I proceed?
No, I've been fairly busy lately, so go ahead.
Okay, good. So one thing I've been trying to do is start writing down user stories because that's what we agreed to do. I also cut my diagram in pieces, and I don't know if it's going to be how, if the pieces are the right way to do the pieces, but anyway, that's what I'm doing. And I would like to dig into argument and, negation and argument versus claim versus entity and all that, which is basically the formalization process. I mean, we can go more into why contextualized claim versus non-contextualized claim versus symbol, but I'd like to put all that in the background and really think about how do we decompose claims? Is that okay with people? Is that an interest, value seen as a useful agenda?
Yes, dictator. I mean,
yeah, yes, dictator.
No, that's fine.
No, I still want, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just joking. That sounds like a good path.
That sounds like a good path. Okay.
I like the way that you answered that, Bentley. I'm going to borrow that again and again.
Well, that's going to be to you.
Yeah. Maybe we shouldn't see Marc-Antoine as a dictator, but more as a king. No.
Whatever the dictator wants.
Sigh. Dear. So this is very approximative, but I've been just trying to list use cases for myself. Probably we should go over them one by one, but as usual, I put a bunch of stuff there and they probably each deserve independent discussion. So I don't know if we should work through them or work through the diagrams first, but I feel like let's go through use cases.
You want to run through them first so we can get a lay of the land, then we can dive deep.
Okay. So for me, first we want to organize related claims in a small number of families. That's what Jamie's been doing with the organizing questions, and questions appears nowhere there, and that's a flaw, and I'll probably want help from her to formulate that one. But right now I was just looking at families. And so when we speak of related claims, well, what are the relations? So I dive a bit deeper into the relations in here. And then basically, why is that? It's because for me, this is the explorer point of view. And I should separate them because they're really important to separate. Let me start with the end up to a point. As an explorer, somebody who's, I don't know if we had agreed on the term for the person who consumes the output of the system. But for me as an explorer, I want to understand the evidence for and against a claim. I want to understand whether the people supporting or attacking a claim are qualified to do so. I don't think everybody wants that. Some people are anti-expert, but some people want to know about expertise. So I think that is a use case. I want to understand the aims and motivations for proposing an action when there's an action being proposed. Like, what do you expect to accomplish with the action? What is the expected outcome? And this goes into this one, plausible scenarios. And how plausible is each scenario? And that's possibly separate. Relative plausibility, and that's a bit of a separate subcase. And then, aims and motivation, like this person proposes doing this because there's this expected outcome, and that outcome is viewed as positive by this person or by a group of person, and like, who wants this? So that's about motivations. And as an explorer, I want to know which beliefs are inconsistent with mine. I think, am I being consistent? Who disagrees with me? That's all in that. In this one, I probably need to subdivide. Is there, I'm sure there's more, but I am basing this on this implicit model of action, epistemic, like, you know, there's causality, like if we have this situation, it's likely to lead to this other situation. This action makes certain situations more or less likely, and certain situations are seen as more or less desirable by different people, and hence you can justify actions by the path to the most desirable and the path where the least desirable outcomes are least likely, the most desirable outcomes are most likely. And behind all this, there's the epistemic. What are the reasons to believe that this situation or this action will lead to this outcome? That's the epistemic layer. And there's also an epistemic layer for motivations. Why do we believe that this person wants that? But that's my kind of generic, and I don't have a model for that, and I probably should, but for me, it's kind of implicit in a lot of other stuff. But I see this as what we want to know and convey. And now, this is not everybody's agenda. Like, for example, the question of who supports or attacks a claim is possibly outside of the canonical debate scope. It's not, I am saying it's in my scope. I think it's in Jamie's scope. I'm not sure, but I think so. Jamie?
I am here. Well, I don't know about the qualified to do so necessarily. This is the one you're talking about, right?
Yep.
So that can be so difficult to assess, right? Because there can be argumentation for that qualification. I think that in our work, we would find argumentation about that, and that would be important to include. But for me, what definitely falls under the scope of the Society Library is not just an explorer being able to understand the evidence for and against a claim, but being able to understand the point of view of everyone in a specific discussion. And a point of view is kind of like the aggregation of understanding the evidence, understanding the claims, and understanding like, a little bit outside of that, which may include like those who are qualified to make such claims. So like there's a bigger kind of understanding that the Society Library is looking to induce that for us is really important to like actually put down, because it implies a lot of what may be necessary in terms of design and how information is organized and presented, because we want people to understand the big picture, but also understand all the little components that the big picture is made out of. So that's like, that's a kind of a design element, and it's got to be in mind and intentional in order to accomplish that specific goal. But yeah, we definitely find arguments about people, whether or not they're qualified to make claims or not, but that's just something that we would scrape up. It's not necessarily something that we specifically look for.
Okay, that's very interesting. I do have a question, and I don't know if we'll dive into this today, but it's definitely a question I want to dive into. I agree totally with the goal of understanding the point of view. I do think the point of view is mostly analyzable as claims you believe, outcomes you support, outcomes you want to avoid. So the analysis I made as, what we have is a kind of causal graph of actions and outcomes, or outcomes of situations without action, and qualitative assessment. This is a bad outcome, this is a good outcome, and hence we should take this action for this reason. I think, and the reasons for believing so, the epistemic layer, saying, this is why I believe that this outcome is likely, unlikely. This is why I believe that this outcome is desirable, undesirable. That's the epistemic layer. So, and maybe I should distinguish those two, I'm not sure. But I think this is the whole picture of point of view. Do you see something in point of view that is not listed there? And that's
There's one thing I absolutely agree with you in like having a specific layer related to like whether or not we should take an action or is this desirable. But there's another piece that, at least for the Society Library, is very important in understanding point of view, which is being able, this is a tall order, right? Being able to identify and recognize the emotions that are tied with point of view. So it's not just like, I understand like the reason why people are making these arguments and I understand the arguments themselves, but like actually being able to get to a point of feeling empathy towards the people who are expressing a certain point of view. And that's where the Society Library's collection of like snippets of podcasts and videos and pictures and things is really important to attach to claims, to try and induce like that dimension of understanding of like, you know, it's not enough for people to be like, the election got stolen, but to like, is there a way through media that's available in a library or in a debate graph that someone could view something that at least makes them be able to entertain the emotion of like the desperation and upset that someone must feel if they hold those particular arguments as being most sound and valid to them. So that's just like a little dimension, and that's a tall order, but like that's our idealistic orientation, is that we'll organize knowledge so that information is available so that they can access those feelings.
Okay, that's extremely important. Thank you, Jamie. This is why I think this meeting is already accomplishing its goals at this point.
Thank you for the compliment, dictator.
Okay, is that a proper answer?
Is that a proper answer, dictator? This is gonna be fun.
Yeah. I've always said, and I've been for something I've always said and have forgotten in recent formalization, because I'm trying to be analytical, is there's all this, when we speak about reasons to believe, I often think in terms of epistemological evidence and, you know, adequate sampling and scientific method. But let's face it, a lot of reasons to believe are in terms of personal stories and anecdotes. People believe something ideologically motivated because something happened to them, or they heard about something happening to someone they can relate to.
Availability heuristic, it's called, I think, in cognitive science, right? If you experience it yourself, or you have recently experienced it, that you believe it to be more true. I think that's what it's called, Miller.
What heuristic? I did not hear.
Availability heuristic.
Availability. Yeah, I think it's more than availability. Yes, it's true that availability increases salience, and salience motivates reasoning. There's no doubt about that. But I'm saying there are foundational stories that we all hold that shape a lot of our beliefs. And when you want to understand somebody, you have to know their story.
Yeah. There was a point I was going to bring up, but I've forgotten it, so I'll come back.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah,
logical, I think, is a general point.
Yeah. There's the common phrase that people say that anecdotes are not data. And I hate that phrase because that's technically inaccurate. Anecdotes are data, very, very, very weak data, but data. And when you have no other information or no other information you trust, an anecdote is king. So
anecdote can also be very, very powerful data if you're looking just to find one example that something is not the case. Like,
yeah.
So it's not, but yeah.
There is no fraud. Well, there's one case of fraud, so you need to rephrase your sentence.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, we call it anecdata, but it's not without value.
Yeah, right. That's a good way to say
it. Sorry, my Zoom just bombed. Quit, no warning, no nothing.
Change from the Zen tree we usually see.
I don't know if all of you are familiar with Edward Snowden's sense maker method.
No.
Okay, that's
surprised, yeah.
Kind of key in our field. Okay, I'm a big fan of Dan Snowden and his cognitive edge.
Snowden. Oh, I thought you said, for some reason my brain processed Edward Snowden. Sorry about that.
Dictator. Dave Snowden. His method, he has many methods, but one of his key methods is he does first a survey to understand what are kind of the important axes of interpretation of people, right? So, are people, for example, complex, simple would be, and he makes it a point that most axes have bad extremes. He's a very much, Aristotelian golden meal. So something being too complex or too simple would be a key axes in our conversation. We often say this is too complex, this is too simple, so it's important to us. So he collects those axes that are important to people. Then he does large-scale story collection. He asks students to collect stories from people, and for people who tell the story to rate the story on those axes, like basically slider, like this is a case where things were too complicated. This is a case where things were seen too simply. This is a case where there was too much hierarchy, not enough hierarchy, too much chaos, whatever. I mean, but again, in this, and then he does kind of nice little cloud graphs of where a lot of stories fall. And he's really interested in massive story collections, so he can get actual clusters. And what he's doing is doing this over time so that when the new stories seem to be shifting in terms of where they fall in the clusters, he says that's a signal of culture change. So he's interested in measuring culture change, because his point is you can't engineer culture change, but at least when it happens, you can detect and encourage or discourage with point interventions. And he has a story about that. But you can't predict, you can't control, but you can nudge. But to nudge, you have to see the shift as it happens, and hence this whole methodology. Very fascinating. But he sees stories as the core of cognition up to a point. We think in stories, that's a fundamental, and that way there's a huge limit to being as analytical as I am, because ultimately it's about stories. And I even believe that. But I also believe that to understand the stories that can break a myth, you kind of need to know where the points of articulation of the story is, so you can identify a story with different points of articulation. So that's why I'm still more analytical. But certainly the sense maker method is relevant to social change. No doubt about that. I have huge, huge, huge admiration for the work he's doing. So yeah, stories have to find a place in there, because stories are often the motivation for beliefs about likelihood and beliefs about desirability. And we have to relate those beliefs to appropriate stories. So I believe that. Thank you. But I do think, however, with this re-adding stories, and again, thank you, Jamie, for reminding me, we may have a bit of a full picture. But how to connect stories is definitely missing in my diagram, and I need to add it. But I think it's a prima facie, it's a fundamental building block. So
I like how you're talking about stories. I mean, I think that one of the roles of curation is when a system like this is fully built out, is to be thinking about the story that an argument is telling. And that's, I think, one of the ways, for me, one of the ways that I don't like Kialo is the like the fire hose. It feels like a fire hose. And I think for me, when I'm an explorer of a system like this, I want it to tell a story. And I think that takes a bit of art and a bit of craft on top of all this technical stuff that we're talking about.
Yep. No,
Joshua, does YSource plan on doing any curation?
Well, I think we use the word curation a little bit differently. You guys are, I mean, to my mind, there's moderation, and there's editorial, and there's curation. I don't want to derail the conversation, but take it off topic. But I guess I think I technically think about the crafting of an argument and making it a good story that's easy for the reader, that's efficient with the reader's time. I think about that technically as editorial, and I think about curation as the decision about which arguments are where, how they're displayed, in what order, etc. But that's the terminology I use, which is a little bit different than how the word is here. And it's certainly something it's certainly goals, unquestionably.
So what I'm hearing, and this is really interesting because that's a new set of use cases. As a contributor, I want to tell a story. as a curator, I want to.
This is the main one that I'm working on right now, because that's also what was missing in my last evaluation. That's why I'm focusing on this whole editorial aspect. I like the distinction between editorial and what did you call it, Joshua?
In my mind, moderation is managing the contributors and users and their own disagreements. You know, either someone breaks a rule,
Yeah.
or they're disputing about what edit should be made. And then editorial is, imagine the newspaper editor, you know, who is helping the storytelling be crafted. You know, maybe it's about consistent language use, maybe it's about the order in which things are presented, maybe it's about the decisions about when are we enforcing, like, this claim should be phrased universally so it can be used outside anywhere, and when are we saying, you know what, let's just keep this claim phrased in a way that's easy to understand in the context of this argument, so this argument works as a story, and then we deal with the whole synonym aspect you guys have talked about. And then curation is a curating museum. You know, which arguments are we putting on the wall, and what arguments are they next to? If someone's searching for an argument, it's all about finding the content. Does that make sense? That's how I divide them in my mind.
Very similar to editing to me, but yeah, either way, it's I think that they're relevant perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah, if you think of a curator or even a head curator with a team of curators, like, they have to work within a confined space. There's only so much wall space, and they only have access to so many different objects, but they're deciding, much like Joshua said, how to contextualize the objects. They're the ones who are writing the little placards up on the wall to explain what the things that people are looking at are. They're the ones who control the lighting. They're the ones who do the programming. So, like, curation is really taking on, like, the full responsibility of how to articulate the objects that you've been able to access in a way that educates the public. So that's the Society Library's mission as well. And we don't necessarily have to deal with moderation at this stage because it's all curation.
Well, I think
so.
that
I have one more definition for curation, right? And I don't hear that exactly fitting into any of your definitions. That is, there's activity that I don't hear fitting into any of your definitions, which is the white paper definition of curation, which is not choosing, the closest you come is what you said, Joshua, putting, like, choosing what goes next to which, but it's maintaining, it's organizing the debates and arguments so that they are going into the right place and they are optimally, the classic case is the deduping, right? What do you call the person that dedupes everything? You know, if it's not a person, then it's an action. And what is that action? Under what category of use cases does that fall under?
okay.
Maybe that's the librarian. Like, if I think about the New York Times, you've got the person who's dealing with what's on the homepage. So they're organizing articles. You've got the editor of an article who's dealing with how is this article structured? And then maybe someone's moderating the comments, or I don't know how moderator fits into that metaphor, but the archivist maybe is managing the library of the archive of the New York Times.
I mean, I think it's possible that it still falls under the responsibility of curator. I'm actually staying at a curator's house right now. He started off his career curating a museum, and in doing so, like, it's also important that you are preferentially choosing what to include and what not to include. And that could be an element of deduping, right? So, like, if someone is curating a natural history museum and there's a garden that you can walk through, they're choosing where to place signs to identify certain plants and where not to, because it's unnecessary replication of the same thing over and over and over again. So I still think that action falls under the definition of a curator.
So, I mean, I would say that curators need to do that as part of their process. But if you're talking about just there's a community of people and someone's in there to say, oh, there's an obvious deduplication, I think it would be helpful for us to use the term moderator for that. So moderators are not trying to change anyone's story. They're just trying to make sure that the information is clear and accurate is even wrong, but clear and, free of typos and stuff.
I think there's that's an interesting conversation. We're definitely going out of the original use cases, but it's definitely useful. But I just want to check with Tim. I think what you're describing in terms, it seems related to what I was saying about identify relations between claims. Like you spoke of deduplication, but when I say this claim is a negation of another, this claim is mutually exclusive with another, this claim is a specialization of another, is that what would fall under what you'd call curation? I just want to check that first.
Well, it depends on how the final set of use cases shakes out. But yes, yes, that is a sort of thing. I mean, there are cases that's not just a relationship. It's removing one relationship and moving it somewhere else, right?
Fair. No, but managing the logical structure between claims, right, and making sure that it's accurate.
Somehow managing the argument map, right? In that sense. And
so this is
kind
about
of things we talked about, refactoring or so on and so forth.
So this is about the accuracy of the global map, whereas what I think Jamie calls curation and Joshua called curation is you have a given curated view, you have a given wall, and you want to make sure that everything in there is an intelligible whole. I often speak of curated maps, and that's exactly what I mean.
Right.
It's like I'm picking out a subset of the global map.
That sounds more like the editorial role.
And I think what Joshua was calling editorial was more the wording and wording in context. Like we're in this context, we want to make sure that it's worded right, as opposed. But there's an editorial of saying this is a curated view, and what do I put in, and why don't I put in that curated view? And then there's the text editorial of making sure that it's expressed well in context for that view.
But see, so what I would say is that so
let's call this view curation.
There's an interesting fine line here, which is that first of all, I would say not just accuracy of the map, but optimization of the map.
Yeah.
And because that also goes to, like, should all these minor evidences be grouped under a bigger claim or something, right? Something like that. But
that's view curation, but it depends on an accurate global, like accuracy curation. Right now, let's speak about accuracy curation and view curation. Does that resonate with people?
Yeah. The thing I was going to point out is that there's a kind of editorial rewording that I would consider curation and not editorial. Editorial is when you have an objective to present in a certain way, as opposed to finding the optimal way of stating something, right?
Good point. And Joshua, I don't know if for you they were both the same editorial or if they were distinct.
I mean, I don't feel really strongly about, everyone using the exact same terms. I mean, if we really want to focus on nailing down the terms for, like, all the different actions that could be taken on the site and what are their, verticals, on game. It feels to me like we all agree generally about the types of actions that might occur.
I think mapping them out is useful, and I think for me this is a useful conversation.
Well, I guess I guess one thing that I think is interesting is there is the editorial of what is this claim, how is this claim worded, and then I think in order for storytelling, to get back to your original point, Marc-Antoine, in order for the storytelling of an argument to be successful, there needs to be a storytelling point of view on the refactoring. So sometimes refactoring actions need to be taken not with the purest view of the librarian, who's going to say what is the most purest logical organization. Sometimes there should be some storytelling applied that says, even though this isn't the ideal way to organize the library of these claims. Sorry, I've got a lens flare here. We should actually group this one higher up because it helps the telling of the story. And that's in my mind is a kind of an editorial of an argument And then there's the bigger macro of the editorial of the whole library. So that could be called an editor, the way it's a Wikipedia editor. It could be called a librarian, an archivist, the management, making sure the data is good, the way that in a nonprofit organization, there's someone keeping an eye on the donor database and making sure all the connections are there. This person's spouse is connected. You know, we know these two people are married. The management, keeping that data clean and valuable is the big editorial oversight. Those are some of my reactions to things I've heard so far.
So this brings up a very important point that we've kind of bumped into before and doesn't have a resolution yet, which is we know that like essentially what you're talking about is the difference between the canonical debate as discussed before and the society library, right? The society library puts a United States political perspective on the debate. And for that perspective, one grouping is better than another, one regrouping. You know, it's like, do you regroup by, like Jamie said, the you know, different, what's the term? I forget it, political stances, the different, I forget your term, Jamie, but political stances. Do you group it in that way, or do you group it according to like groups of related studies, or do you group like the canonical debate doesn't have yet any sort of heuristics or guidelines on what is the best regrouping when we know that you're going to regroup something by some kind of category, and the best category perhaps is according to the editorial view or the story you're trying to tell. And so how, like, I don't know how to reconcile that when, you know, I don't know how to say this. You might have competing maps,
right?
And yet you have to manage in the canonical debate level, the scoring algorithms, and haven't seen how that's going to work. I know I'm jumping ahead.
But I think I can provide synthesis to this, especially since you're referring to the society library. So first thing I want to say is, yeah, I'm a Western girl in a Western world. So of course we're taking on the US perspective. It's just a way to remain practical and feasible. But as for reconciling the differences between a directed ontology and something that is a loosely formed ontology that is being built up by people who are cooperating together and building a debate map, we can continue to use the metaphor of putting things in a museum. So in one way, like the canonical debate, essentially we're dealing with the marketplace of people selling and buying and trading and arguing for the value of you know, historical items. And then there's this entity that's a museum that will purchase or be gifted some of these objects and will organize that content in order to create public programming for educational purposes and for, you know, broadening the public's awareness on certain subjects. So in terms of how the Society Library and Canonical Debate Labs can relate in terms of how their data is structured, to me, the Canonical Debate Lab is a fantastic opportunity to just host a kind of marketplace of ideas. The way it self-organizes is going to be based on who is participating in the value of the things that are being exchanged. But the Society Library can benefit from there being a marketplace of ideas, because that could be something that a curator then looks at and says, oh, these are the most relevant, most important, most hot topic items that should be put into a collection, so that the public who wants to take a tour one day and just kind of get the gist of a certain moment in time or a certain political subject can take a tour and walk through this and at least see the different objects and arguments and whatever, so that they can understand what the hell is going on. And if they want to go from there to something deeper like an archive or a library, or participate in the marketplace of ideas themselves, they can be directed towards those routes. So I think that's how you reconcile. But you're not wrong in that the Society Library is a very specific ontology, and that ontology is organized as an inquiry after truth. So it starts by finding the right questions and then organizing all of the argumentation towards arguing what the right point of view is.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. What I was trying to highlight was the conflict it brings up when the goal is to enable this sort of thing to happen from every perspective that people want to see, right? But when the argument map is structured one way and the curators have put it together one way, and it's kind of a very cold and practical structure. When you try to map it to this more editorial view of the society library, you find that those groupings don't help tell that story. And so you want to regroup, right? And then the question is, what happens to the argument map at that moment? And can you have different various perspectives looking at the same argument map and wanting to regroup it in different ways and yet still maintain the original integrity without a push and pull that, you know?
No, that,
yeah.
I agree totally, Tim. Okay, can I say it in my terms? Because I think
Yes,
it is
dictator.
relevant. Yes, no, I will go finally take the dictator hat. It's time. What we try to have, or what I believe we're trying to have, is we have the global argument space, and this is closer to what CDL is doing. Or even what I'm doing, because I think I'm trying to track provenance more than CDL is, but that's detail. But we have a global argument space. And in that, there is a work of global, what we call accuracy curation, is to make sure that the relationships between the different arguments are accurate, blah, blah, blah. And then we have storytellers who make a map, and curation, the view curation, that way is a form of storytelling. When Society Library is saying, well, here are the arguments, they're putting many stories together, but they're telling a story about these are the main stories. It's a meta story, if you will, but it's still storytelling. And what I hope to see, and that's a use case, and I should add it as a use case, is that when I think very few people will look at a global view, because global views are going to be huge. We'll mostly spend time in curated views. But what I hope will happen is that when we're looking at a curated view, there's a kind of, whether it's hover or extra signals or whatever, that tells you, well, this argument has also been put in this other curated view, or you can look at all its neighborhood in the global view, so that you can see it either in a global perspective or in another local perspective and navigate between local perspectives easily. Like, this is how you would view this from this point of view, and only using the arguments of that side. But then you'd have this awareness. This is this partial view, and if you want to look at another partial view, this is how you'd see it. So I hope that there should be wormholes between curated, coherent perspectives.
Absolutely. That's definitely a long-term goal for Society Library.
Yeah, Marc-Antoine, I'd like to, I don't know where, mark this down as sorry, let me pause. No, there's this one problem that's been at the back of my mind for a long time, which is this. I see, you're exactly right, that people are going to spend their time in the curated views, and that is of great consternation to me, because one of the goals I want for the canonical debate is that people can't do that, can't hide all the arguments. We want everybody to have full access, right? And so this is something we've talked about before, and what is the solution? I don't have the solution, but I'm starting to visualize where it should go, which is exactly any derived view should, it should be a standard or protocol or something where any derived view should be required to state that it's a curated view. It should be required to show percentages. Like, it should say it's a curated view, most recent update is X, and X number of arguments or claims have been hidden from the view, and require a link to see the whole thing back at the original source. Something like that. I don't want to design the whole thing now, but that's what I'm thinking is the evolving thought here.
There's
Like
a banner that says, warning, you are in a bubble.
Yeah, totally. Warning,
Something
you're in a
like
bubble.
it, yeah.
And here's a wormhole to another bubble. Absolutely.
But yeah, it should be standardized, like a widget or something that automatically does that.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
Keeping that in mind, then we would have to talk about licensing agreements, and that talks about, and then we'd be forced to talk about who actually owns the data, whether or not it's open source or open access. Because if we want to have something like tied to that, anytime the data appears anywhere altered or curated to the point where we think it's biased, then, you know, we just have to kind of put a feather there in our cap and think
Well,
about that later.
Yeah, if any of us is in disagreement that the content needs to be Creative Commons own, you know, fully licensed, I guess the license would have to be, you have to show where you got it, which means refer to the underlying database, right? But it should be Creative Commons as far as I'm concerned.
I don't know if you can have a Creative Commons license and have something more sophisticated like a widget that says you're seeing only this percentage of that data.
I
maybe,
think,
I'm not sure.
I think so. I think so. I think you can have see the curated
It could be a modified license, but the licenses do that where they require attribution, right? So it could be a modification on the attribution requirement where it says any place you display this data, you need to either display the widget, or if it's printed text, you need to display this information.
Yeah,
Like,
There's a lot of flavors of Creative Commons. I'll paste the one that we're using currently in Ysaurus in the chat.
Yeah, there's Creative Commons is not, I'm not sure Creative Commons is exactly right, but I think we're agreeing on the generic goals. I think it's that we agree that curation is work, and curation, like when you're creating a curated view, it has to have recognition. And I think it should be easy for someone to fork it, but then you need provenance information, and this is a derivative of, and quote what it's a derivative of, and blah, blah, blah. So that's what I would, and maybe there will be different licenses for curated views. And the same with the underlying data. Now, of course, the license on the underlying data is a bit difficult because sometimes you're quoting someone. It's a but the original, should they not have ownership of their original statement? That's difficult.
Wait. No. To clarify, what I meant was that the canonical debate data has to be Creative Commons, but I don't see any. I don't think it has to be like the viral GPL license. I think people should be able to make curated views and copyright their curation. Anything that is not owned by the canonical debate, they can own as long as they actually have the rights to what they're showing, right? But yeah, they own their curation. I think that's fine.
Some databases store licenses for every chunk, like for every sentence. And this is kind of useful when you're importing data from other systems with a specific license, for example. So like I have a fine granular licensing system, but I think we're like going very deep here right now.
We are.
I wonder what a curated view is. It can be many things, but for me, I still look at it as like somebody that just presents it can be a news article, and that's why I posted the example just in chat right now. If you create a news article and you pull in a sub part of the graph that could be hosted in CD, is that a curated view? Because of course the person writing that article owns the content of the article, but yeah, the arguments and the claims that I stored in CD can still be Creative Commons easily. It's just like augmenting basically something you pull in from CD, no? Or should I look at a curated view as something different?
I think there's many kinds of curated view, and I was certainly seeing a map, like for example, a causal graph, or a bubbles and arrows map, or any other way, as this can be a curated view because I've picked a subset of the global map and saying this makes sense as a whole. Now, of course, it can also be a text, and for me, or a conjunction of a text and all the arguments in that text, that's also a curated view.
So what I need to do here with literally just show a subgraph. The only thing is the graph is not shown, but the graph is there. It's simply only the text that describes the graph is there.
I've actually done this, or I've actually been part of this. I'm an author, one of the contributors to a book called 97 Things Every Software Architect Should Know. And it was touted as the first Collective Commons book, the first book ever written as Collective Commons on the internet. And so like it was, I think, O'Reilly, and they had they just had a process for people to submit, and they put it all in a wiki online. Every contribution was Collective Commons. And so it was free to view and free to reuse and that sort of thing. But still, the book publisher packaged it up into a book and sold the book. And so their action of adding value by putting it into a book and putting it on shelves and selling it, they kept 100% of the profits. Me as an author, I didn't get anything because I knew I was contributing under Collective Commons. But their end of the bargain was they were selling they were selling the book, right? The physical book. But the book, all the contents of the book are free and available online. So they aren't allowed to take that down, but they're allowed to resell the book. Same thing, if you want to put up a website that's just like a web, what do you call it? A frame that points at the original canonical debate and try to sell that, go for it. You know, you haven't really added any value. I'm not sure why anybody would pay for it. You could try to dupe people. That doesn't break the license, but you haven't really added value. But so to me, any derived work you can sell. You just have to give it attribution and link or point somehow back to the original free source.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that's what we mean often by editorial decisions, right? Saying that selecting, like there's a notion of free stuff out there, or Creative Commons or this or that, and saying these are important to read and they're all relevant and there won't be too much overlap. That's what curation work is. It's saying this is a map of this territory and you know, not too much overlap, and it pretty much covers the territory. And that's work, and that's what the curation work is, the creating a view. And it has value, which is independent from the value of each of the pieces. It's the statement that once you have read this, you have a good idea about the territory. This is a good enough map of a given territory.
I agree that the act of curating and on a argument website like this is a kind of intellectual work, and you know, in an ideal world would be intellectual property that could then be, you know, leveraged in other ways directly. I'm sort of skeptical that that could be put into practice in any way, because the debate map, I think, will be such a specific situation. So my answer is the act of curation is intellectual, but I don't know how much time and effort is worth spent on it, codifying it as a piece of transportable intellectual property.
Do you agree with me that you just negated Jamie's entire business model? Because that's what she's doing.
It's a business model. I would just say that, like, it just expresses itself as antithetical to the mission of the Society Library, which is to provide extremely high integrity, high quality information packages to improve the decision making of a given population. So essentially just enabling free and informed choice through access to information, and reckoning with the fact that people only have so much time in a day. And so packaging various iterations of that content, but in complete adherence to our commitment to high integrity, comprehensiveness, representation of all points of view, which is something that's codified in the American Library Association's Office of Intellectual Freedom Library Bill of Rights. So the very specific dedication to organizing information that librarians of any identity commit to the public. So,
yeah, no, guys, I think you're misunderstanding me. I think you're misunderstanding me pretty dramatically.
I'm sorry if it sounds dramatic. I've had my second cup of coffee today.
I meant like intellectual property. Like if I make an image, then I can go make money. If I make an image on Photoshop, I can go make money selling that image in galleries. The act of curating, organizing, if I organize data on Ysource or on Socrates or on Instagram, I can't make money on the way in which I've put these images in order. Like that,
right?
I disagree.
Difficult to leverage from a for-profit business.
Yeah, and I think
which
Jamie,
I don't see as being what society, if I understand
Mark-
society library, that's not its thing.
Right, Marc-Antoine, can
I
I
wasn't talking
respond
about
really
that.
quickly?
yeah, well, I
Thank
also
you.
think there's a misunderstanding. So
I think there's a misunderstanding too. I think that you expressed it as a business model, and I did preface at the beginning of my little mini rant on how rockin' libraries are, that wasn't the business model of the Society Library. So
Yeah, I know.
yeah,
I agree.
I'm in
I wasn't
agreement with
talking
you,
about
Joshua.
society library at all. I was talking.
okay, and my
Well,
turn to
but the
disagree with
point is
both of
that-
you. I'm disagreeing with both of you. What I think we're speaking about what is curation, right? And society library and maybe business model is not exactly the right term, but curators make a salary in museums, and society library is asking for subsidies because it's what it's doing is of value. The question is, can you make curation into a mission that will earn a living? And I interpret what Joshua was saying about, it's hard to make a living out of curation. He wasn't saying it has no
wasn't what I was
value.
saying.
Okay, but I thought you said it's hard to make money out of the intellectual act of curation. That's what I heard.
It's hard to make that a transportable piece of intellectual property that I could then license and sell.
Okay,
like,
fair.
I can't. If I make an image, I can put that image on T-shirts. If I write an essay, I can publish that essay in a number of places. But if I organize claims on an argument tree, that act of organization is intellectual, but it is very difficult.
No,
to
but
make
you
that
can
a protectable
you can
intellectual
host
property.
it. You can host it on a website with ads.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree, but it is slightly different from what I understood. But even now, I'm not sure I agree. I think a curation is a thing of independent, and we're not contesting value, but monetizable value. And monetizable doesn't mean sold, as in you can ask for subsidies for it as monetization. And I'm saying Jamie's success so far proves that it can be monetized. Because I'm also arguing that a lot of what she's doing is curation. And I'm not sure if you disagree with that.
And you're actually not wrong, Marc-Antoine, because we have sold data products. So we have already sold collections, and that just contributes to the sustainability of the mission. But that is something that falls within one of our revenue streams. So you're not wrong there, but it's also not the only thing that we do. We have many revenue streams.
Fair enough. I was basically trying to reply to Joshua, who said, you cannot monetize this. And I said, no, I don't think that's true.
There's your anecdata that proves the point.
Yeah.
So Tim, in your view of the canonical debate platform, you imagine a world in which there's a data set of a lot of claims that are interconnected, and then a professional writer, say like Ezra Klein or Maddie Iglesias, goes in and says, oh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a curated view of what I think are the most interesting and relevant claims from the canonical debate, and I'm going to host that on my website and charge ads for that. Like I'm gonna make here's my filtered view of the argument, and I host that on my site and I make money off of that.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, there's 5 minutes left. We did not go through the list, but I just want to hear, and maybe we'll probably continue this conversation next Friday, but is that seen as a useful process? I see it as a useful process. I just want to check with everybody.
I do as well. It aligns us, it brings us onto the same page, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the process is yet, but I think we've gotten exactly what we were talking about before, that there's a lot of big issues and roadblocks we're going to hit along the way that we should really get aligned with at the very beginning. And I think we've learned a lot about each other. Yes.
Yes, I was very much intending to get into, this is kind of the stuff I was talking about all this time: symbol, thought proxy, topic, symbol in context, decontextualize, blah, blah, blah. And then this is kind of the second chapter, which is, okay, how do we decompose a claim into entities? How do we identifies those families? How do we identify relationship between arguments? And this is what I wanted to talk about today, and I still want to talk about it, but it won't be today at this point, obviously. Let's respect time. And by the way, I will push that today, and like as soon as we're done. I just finished writing that, but I will probably add stories before I do so because I think they're extremely important. Not sure how yet.
Well, I'll just say I want to take responsibility for in part veering this group down a topic that started with definitions. My deepest and sincerest apologies, Dictator, and everyone else too.
No, I think, do you mean before this meeting?
Oh no, I think when Joshua mentioned curation, I was like, ooh, let's talk about that. And so we didn't get through the list. So,
no, that
sorry,
yeah.
Again,
I don't think that was. I don't think that was time wasted. It's not where I wanted to go. But the question is, are we losing time fighting, or are we productively exploring differences? And I think it was more of the latter. So I'm happy. I'm not. I do think this has to be on the agenda at some point, but I don't care about when as much. But I will make. My next action is right now I'm writing in a text document because that's what I'm used to doing. I'll put that on Google Docs so it's public, and I'll do that within minutes of closing the call. I'll put those diagrams on the GitHub. And I think next time we'll continue going through the user list and see how it connects to the diagram, and if that's okay with everybody.
Well, I wouldn't go to entity modeling. I would go to bound context modeling based on this. I think we like entity modeling. That's where the whole bound context idea came from. If people are still up for that, in my opinion, all of these use cases are too broad to try to model in one diagram. And
yeah. Well, you've noticed I've started to cut my diagrams in parts.
Exactly. But based on these use cases, by bundling them together, you have a guiding way to do that. You know what goes once together.
One thing I'm realizing is I've said in my use case as a curator, and I'll start distinguishing the view curator from the global consistency, how did I call it? Curator. And maybe I need better words for one word for that would be nice. I think I'd like to keep curator for the view curator, but who does the accuracy curation? Maybe we need another name for that, like what CDL calls curation.
Yeah, I think so too.
So if you have a suggestion, it's welcome. As a I'm tempted by consistency modeler or a logic maintainer or something like that.
Argument modeler.
Argument modeler is not bad.
But yeah, I think we can go into detail in the next.
But it's important for the use cases, right? I'd like to say as a curator, well, as a view curator or as a statement curator, and I'd like to have a PIT name for that. And I'm glad we identified that. For me, that's totally productive time.
I'm so glad to hear you're pleased, Dictator.
So I was sad to miss some meetings over the Christmas holidays. I'd love some context on the Dictator. Is there
oh my gosh,
rotating hat? Is there rotating hat of dictatorship?
Yeah,
has Mark been,
Mark's been
for life?
No, it's been a rotating,
Well, basically, it's between mostly alternating between Tim and me, with Steven co-dictator with me.
I was the original dictator.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
Maybe we need another day for you to still be dictator.
I'm so pleased with the work that you all are doing, dictators.
Well, technically. She ceded her Tuesdays to Marc Antoine, but
I did, yes.
And then she'll take it back at some point.
And then we flipped, so I'm on Friday now because Tim took last Tuesday.
Right.
To kind of explain it better, we there was a major tension between people wanting to work bottom up and people wanting to work top down. And we resolved it by splitting the days in half and doing both in parallel. And so I'm the bottom-up dictator, and they're the top-down dictators. And I do think this split will make both sides more productive, and like probably more productive as a whole than if we just stick with one. Because I think, you know, exactly like the top-down gets all those major road bumps out of the way ahead of time.
I just want to underline that
yeah.
too.
No, I agree,
Look at
Tim.
me.
I think it's splitting it was a good thing.
I think we might need a session to explore the meanings of the term bottom-up dictator.
So we'll do that next. I mean, so it'll
You'll
probably
see
become
it. You'll see
clear
it in practice on
yeah.
Tuesday.
Do you want to be the
Yeah.
dictator on that, Joshua, in that session?
Or are you saying that the phrase may be misinterpreted by some people? Is that your?
I feel that the phrase is like worthy of, you know, that a cultural exploration of other bottom-up dictators in history and their
Oh my God, yeah.
experiences and problems with the challenge. I should say the challenges with the approach. I'm giving you guys a hard time. That's what I'm
I
doing.
for one, just want to say that I support the facetious use of the word in order to make it somewhat of a joke, because that social structure in reality, I don't think has led to many amazing advancements of humankind. But that's just one teeny tiny cultural lens. But I'm having fun with it in the meantime. We can argue about it later, I guess.
I just like to say that the day that the bottom-up meeting lands on April Fool's Day, it's going to be hosted by Dick Butkus.
I won't be there for that one.
I would make a point of being there if that was to happen.
All right. Well, on that note,
see you next Tuesday.
One second.
All right, guys.
Yes.
I posted in the chat. It's a project called HackMD. I don't know if you're aware of it, but it could help with the use case of you writing Markdown and you want to have it on GitHub, but still want to have diagrams and want to have collaborative editing at the same time.
Okay, I'll have a look.
Something that does that.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. By the way, just so you know, Stephen, before you leave, two projects I'm looking at very closely. One is the underlay. Absolutely look at the underlay there. It's more the low level, how to have this more the hyper knowledge, low level stuff, but they're doing it in a really interesting way. And yes, okay, cats are more interesting, fine. And the other project I'm looking at, the Fabric people are looking at having a database layer in the distributed web, and there's a lot again of common ground with what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's a bit post the second one. I'm not certain I've heard of that.
Okay,
yeah, post them in
Gotta
the
run, folks.
See you.
Have a good weekend.
Bye, everybody.
You too.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.